Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I am an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. And today I am so excited. I am here with the amazing Debbie Held. She is a multi-craftual fiber fantastic type person. And you might remember that I did a 15-minute video on yarn structure. And in that, I mentioned that I was going to try to find a spinner to interview to educate myself and y'all at the same time about more understanding of how yarn structure works and how it affects our knitting. Now, Debbie is an amazing writer. She has been writing all her life, but luckily in about 2015, she decided to start writing about spinning and fiber. She's written for Interweave, the word I can never pronounce, Shacked. There you go. I always want to put an N in it. It's like snack. It's a funny looking word. Spindle Company, Spinoff, Ply. She is an instructor and ambassador for Sweet Georgia. Is it called Academy or?
The School of Sweet Georgia.
School of Sweet Georgia. And she has written amazing articles under her Handspun Habit. And it's just great. I assume she loves fiber and yarn and all those things. She's not just a knitter, she's a weaver. She does all kinds of crazy stuff. Is there anything I missed? This is Debbie.
Hi, Barbara. It's good to see you again. Thank you for that accomplished introduction. I appreciate it. Did you miss anything? I think you caught most everything.
Excellent. I'm a little high energy, I know.
No. Dude, I know you. It's fine.
So now, when did you start spinning?
The end of 2013 or 14. The end of 2013 with a spindle. I think that's about right. Maybe 2012.
Okay.
End of 2012, 2013. I have it written in my profile, and I can't remember, to be perfectly honest. But I used a spindle for 2 years and then got into a wheel in the beginning of 2014.
Isn't that how it progresses, though? It's like, here, try a spindle. How about a wheel? Have you seen these e-spinners?
Yeah.
It's just one of those, it just kind of balloons, doesn't it? How many wheels do you have?
I have, I think 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, we won't tell them, but do you have a favorite? We'll keep it secret from them.
I know this is kind of a cop-out, but, well, I love the e-spinners, and I am crazy about my Little Gem, my Magic Craft Little Gem. I love that thing. Yeah.
So then that's a kind of wheel. What we're talking about is the wheels. I know that most people, if they don't know spinners, when they envision a wheel, they're thinking about like the big wagon wheel looking thing, the Laura Ingalls Wilder, but that's not, wheels have gotten really cool and sleek and innovative, right?
Yeah, I can spin any yarn I want. It's across the room. I would pick it up for you, but I have an e-spinner, one of those new Daedalus e-spinners. It's 4 pounds, and I mean, it can go anywhere. I have a Hanson mini spinner. They can all just, it's amazing what one little thing can do now, what you can accomplish with it.
And you even, I know that I know quite a few spinners who love spinning, but they're kind of like some knitters I know knitters who like to acquire yarn, but the yarn doesn't necessarily turn into a knitted item. I know there are spinners who make yarn, but that yarn doesn't necessarily ever become anything. You use your yarn, right?
I started using my yarn particularly when I started writing for her Handspun Habit, when I wrote that column. Well, first of all, I had, that was the agreement. I had things I needed to do in order to then write about what I learned. But what I noticed was, I am crazy about spinning, right? And I'd always been knitting, but not very well. Like I wasn't a great knitter. and it bothered me, but spinning has brought me back to knitting, and I'm a much better knitter. So I just love how it's all intertwined.
And you don't just, your
Oh,
lovely,
and
lovely
yeah,
scarf, you weave as well, right?
I do weave. I'm not as accomplished there as I'd like to be, but yes, I do weave. I love to use my hand spun because it really teaches me how to be a better spinner, how to make the yarn I want, um, more patience. It's something I just didn't expect in my life, and I can't believe how it's brought in my crafting, actually. Yeah,
Very
yeah, and
cool.
I do still. And I don't have as much hand spun in stash as I used to, but my fiber stash is ridiculous. So it happens.
Yes, that's proto yarn. That's
I love
yarn
it.
to
Spider
be.
yarn. That's great.
Yarn to be.
That's
Um,
terrific.
Now, as I mentioned, my goal here was to try to learn from you and get a better, because I have a basic understanding. And
Yeah.
one of the big things that I mentioned, I've mentioned, I think in a video before, is I understand that it's not just, is it wool, is it alpaca, is it silk, that different wools have
Right.
different properties. And we're even seeing in commercial yarns, breed specific
Mhm.
wools.
Mhm.
And I'm sure they all have their own idiosyncrasies and purposes. And the ones I have written down that, I mean, obviously merino has kind of been the dominant fiber for years.
I'd say
And
so.
I kind of refer to it as the tyranny of softness. It's that this goal for softness above any other property.
Yeah. Right. Right.
But there's strength, there's bounce, there's different things that different yarns bring. And I
Yep.
was the ones I know of right off the top of my head are merino, Rambouillet, or however that's
Mhm.
pronounced,
I say Rambouillet.
Cormo,
Yep.
Targhee,
Yep.
BFL,
Yep.
these different yarns. And I also know the words micron,
Mhm.
crimp. I've heard
Mhm.
the word crimp,
Mhm.
and fiber length.
Yeah.
And I know
Staple
all
length.
these
Yep.
things are important,
Yep.
but I don't know why.
Okay. Okay.
So I was wondering if you could talk about breed specific characteristics and how we talk about them, and then what, like, well, okay, we'll go with that first. I'm not
Okay.
going to give you so much at the
Okay.
same
Well, I
time.
won't
I
remember.
have such a list. That's why I wrote it down. I'm like,
I
things
won't
I
remember
need
it.
to
You know.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So breed specific. I think that you're right. Merino was something that, well, even as spinners, as I understand it, there was a time when that was really all that anybody could get, and or would have, not that this is tragic in any means, but would have to spin, from wool that came off a sheep from somebody they knew or could purchase
Mhm.
from a shepherd. So now, although I am not as educated in the names of commercial yarn, I still, keep my ear open. And yes, so Rambouillet is different from BFL, and you might know all of that. But I guess to start with, they have different staple lengths.
Staple length. See there.
Staple lengths. Okay, so they have different staple lengths. I brought a couple to show you. So
Excellent.
this I think is. Yes. Okay. So this, if I'm not mistaken, is a merino and cormo
Okay.
uh, mix. So the
You could
sheep
hold it a
itself.
little higher. There we go.
Okay. Here we go.
Perfect.
There's the staple length. There we go. Okay. The sheep itself was a cross of these breeds.
Okay.
And here we go again with the tyranny of softness. But hey, it's a lot of fun to work with and still a delight. And you can see the staple length is probably a couple and a half inches,
Okay.
but its micron count really tells us about its softness. If you were buying this online or you didn't know, that count under 20 especially is just one way to register its softness.
So micron is like the actual diameter of the fiber, like an individual fiber, right?
Yes.
And no, I hear in your voice.
Micron is, well, see, I don't know if I can explain it that well. It's a way of testing the softness. And yes, I do believe the diameter has something to do with it. It's a way of testing its softness. So the shepherd can say, you know, it's X number. It's a measurement.
Okay. And do we want a bigger number or a smaller number?
A lower number. So
lower number means softer.
Especially, you've got this in especially fine fleeces. And yeah, 18 is something that is considered super fine. Okay. And there are breeders or shepherds who can even get it down to 15. So it's incredibly soft, but knowing this micron count is also going to tell you how this, well, it's all a part of all of these terms, how this fiber will wear. This crimp that you see, for instance, it looked like almost little, well, if you think about a crimping curling iron.
That's what I was thinking. I think about the 80s and when you crimp your hair.
Exactly that. All right. So here are some before it's been pulled apart. And this is visibly different from the very soft cross of merino and CBM, but this is much longer.
Okay.
And now I pulled this out of my stash before I started talking to you. And I believe it's in the Border Leicester long wools. That's a good 3, almost 4 inches there. So you've got staple length, right? That tells you, it's another one that tells you how long your staples are, your sheets almost, when they get processed. So I'm skipping around a little bit. Let's not even get there. So we've got staple length. That's just the length of these locks.
Now, does staple length contribute to the eventual strength of the yarn? Like, is a longer fiber stronger?
A shorter, finer, soft fleece with all of this crimp has all this elasticity, and that'll give it good memory when you're knitting with it in the end. But it's soft. It's always going to be soft. It could be plied and it would be stronger if it had more plies in your yarn, but it's always going to be a soft yarn. Might not be ideal for, say, socks, but if you were to have a long wool, first you have to spin it differently anyway, but I guess you have to spin it differently. A different amount of twist is going to hold this together than what is going to hold this together. You need more twist to hold something very, very
shorter together. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so when it's longer, you might have more drape, less twist involved. It can be used for it can be used for a multitude of knitting. It's great for socks, or garments, even accessories, low twist items, maybe lace. Whereas this, pardon me.
I love your mug.
Thank you. My best friend sent it to me.
It's so cute. Right here.
It's very cute. It was right when I got Stanley, and I moved into this place like 6 months prior.
Very cool.
She got me a whole set. So, yeah. Okay, now we've talked staple length, micron count, a little bit of twist. What were some of the other terms you gave me?
Well, actually, I want to just go in trying to listen and react. So you said that when you have a longer staple, so longer hairs, you don't have to twist it quite as tightly
to hold it together.
Hold it together. So, and then you said that'll give it more drape. So extrapolating that, so you're saying a yarn with looser twists are going to be more drapey?
Yes. Generally, how can I even explain this? So yes, because these long wools are generally silkier, they generally have a luster anyway. It's just part of their characteristics. This doesn't mean that you won't find one that I think they're all pretty shiny. It depends on maybe how they're crossed, all right? Because if you were to create, cross your breeds and make a BFL Cormo, you're going to have a longer wool, a longer staple length from the BFL because it's a long wool.
Okay.
But if you were to breed that or even blend that fiber with a shorter wool, either way, those characteristics get put together. So you could card this.
Makes sense.
You could like combine them however you want. In my head, I'm thinking spinner. I'm trying to think commercial.
Well, you know what? You can just
yes.
stick with spinner, and
Okay.
I can try to do the extrapolation.
I like that.
So,
I like that.
So you're not trying to get it in your brain. So, okay. So if we're talking about staple length.
Yes.
So we're looking at so merino is going to be on the short.
Yes.
Could you rank them? So merino versus Cormo.
Cormo is also short.
Cormo is short. Rambouillet.
Very crimpy, very, very crimpy. The fine wools are crimpy. I wonder what fin. Some of them border on in the range of fineness into medium coarseness, into which it goes along with your staple length generally.
Okay, so now crimpiness. You mentioned something that crimpiness brings more memory.
Definitely, yep.
Okay, so and by when you're talking about, when I talk about memory in terms of a knitted item, that is the desire of that stitch to remember how it was in to pull back and to stay in that. Yes. Which is great for a garment or something because it's not going to lengthen and it's not going to get all wonky on you.
Right, right.
On the flip side, though, if something has really super memory, like trying to block it out into a lace,
yes,
it might pull back on you and it might not be as open. So maybe a crimpier yarn isn't necessarily the best thing for lace.
Actually, fine wools are used for lace weight.
Okay, so it doesn't work that way. Okay.
Which is just puts the whole thing that I said to question. But no, it's good for lace. It has good memory. So I think when you block it, it's going to stay.
But it's just not going to, it's not going to be like silk that you can block it to 3 times its original size.
Yes.
It's going to hold its size.
Which is silly, really, now that we're thinking, okay, memory does remember where it was placed. But, okay, say you're making a pair of socks.
Okay.
You're going to want to find a yarn. You're going to use a yarn that probably has nylon in it for strength, or maybe tencel, maybe. Not everybody agrees with that. Some people use just plain wool. But if you were to take, say, a Teeswater, and I'm not saying this is wrong, I'm just saying in the range of opinions, if you were to take, say, a Teeswater, which is very long, not crimpy, your socks won't stay up because there's no bounce.
Interesting.
There's no crimp, bounce, memory to elasticize them.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
There are a myriad of wools you could use for even your lace. It really depends on their specific characteristics.
See, and that's where it's so complicated. Because then it all comes into, and we'll get into it. It's like, how is a single going to behave versus how applied yarn is going to behave versus how many plies it is, and that's why we're talking about this. Now, I've been seeing Targhee. Mm-hmm. What does Targhee bring to the party?
I love it. It's bouncy. It's got that elasticity. It's still a fine, it's in the fine wools. To me, it reminds me very much of a grippier, well, people say merino can't be grippy. It reminds me of an even grippier merino. That's how it feels to me. It's beautiful to spin. It can be spun thin. It can be spun thicker.
Okay.
It can be used for so many things. I feel like it's one of those fibers that you can make a 3-ply and still have a sweater that'll wear well, even if even though it's a fine wool. Or you could use it as singles if you put enough twist into it.
Okay. So now
It'll
that's
be nice
something,
and bouncy.
that's an interesting point that I really hadn't occurred to me. And it actually was something I have that I wanted to talk to you about, because it's frankly one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
But you said and the idea. So when you think of single versus plied, for me, it rarely occurs to me that the single still has spin. I mean, it still has twist
Yes.
to it. And so what you're saying is you can have a low twist or a high twist single.
You can, yes.
And so does the more twist it have, does it make it stronger? Because one of the challenges, I think, to singles is that without the plying, they are physically weaker. They're not as strong, correct?
They are.
So if you're trying to really block out a lace, I mean, if you put too much tension on it, you could run into issues. Or does it work for socks? Or
it would feel all wiry, and it would not hold up as socks. No, not at all. But but it could be blended with something stronger. Like you might buy, well, I think that's a very common commercial yarn is a superwash merino nylon, right?
Okay.
Isn't that sock yarn?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. 75%, 80% of the wool.
Yeah. 80-20 is what you see the most frequently, is with the nylon.
It's quite strong, but it's got multiple plies in it.
Yes.
And it's got that nylon in it as well. And it's all blended together before it's machine spun and plied. And interestingly, a singles yarn technically can actually be, I almost hesitate to say this, but it can also be a multiple stranded yarn that's not got opposite twist in it. So there's no, it's not like this. It's not doing this number. You're saying it's not like this. They're just laying together in the yarn.
So I've never even thought of that. I don't know. The only thing I can think of that might fall into that category, like right off the top of my head,
I don't think so. I have
they're cotton yarns.
Yes,
that are just multiple strands, but they're not plied together. They're just like, it's essentially like knitting, holding 6 tiny strands together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not.
So it is
sure
in theory. But what this was going into is these roving yarns, these yarns that they call roving yarns, that they're knitting these big blankets out of. The wisdom of trying to make something out of, because roving, what specifically is roving? Like,
roving is a preparation. It's a commercial preparation. Well, that's not true. Roving is basically the preparation of your fiber. It is a jumbling of the staple lengths, short and long. Like, okay, you shear a sheep, it's got shortish, it might have shortish cuts in there. So it's a jumbling so that when it's spun together, it will go poof instead of flattening. And it also depends on, again, my spinner's mind is thinking how you spin it. It depends on how you spin it. But a roving is a different preparation than a top, which is when everything's aligned. They're all, all the shorts have been taken out and they're put into it, they're processed into a sheet and like tiles and all of that. It's very worsted in terms of spinning, not in terms of.
That's what I was gonna say. So a top is what you would spin worsted spun from, and a roving would be leaning more towards a woolen spun yarn.
Yes, exactly. And these giant roving yarns that they sell, the more plain, and I'm talking about the plain like space, surface, the more surface that's exposed, the less stable and strong that yarn, or that yarn, let's call it a yarn, will be. So if it's all fat
Yarn,
and puffy and untwisted, yeah, it's not going to wear well.
it's just going to kind of, I mean, if it would do what you just did with those little pieces you showed us, if you pull on it, it just comes apart.
It's going to pill first.
Okay.
And it depends how much twist was put in it. I mean, it could be stable, but it's not going to wear, it's going to look terrible. I mean, your jeans will rub against it and it will pill.
Yes.
Because that surface is exposed.
Okay, and that's an excellent point. We're jumping around. Going back to when you were talking about staple length, the shorter and finer it is, the more apt it is to pill, correct?
Yes, there's that. So you can account for that in your spinning.
So a tighter
twist. Yeah, tighter twist or tighter ply, both. You have to sample. If you're a spinner, you're going to want to sample before you make that decision. And the best thing to do is
spinners swatch too?
We do. Well, we should. We should swatch a little bit of the yarn we're thinking of making, and then we should knit that up into some kind of swatch, so it's a double swatch, because you have no idea how it'll wear. I mean, you might think you know how it'll wear, but you want to test it out first, because spinning might be a joy, but it's also a tremendous amount of work.
Yes.
Time that you
so much work. And that's I've been perfectly happy to buy my yarns because I put a whole lot of work into them after their yarn, and the idea that I'm going to spend all this time making the yarn first, and those sheep to shawl people,
it's all power to them. Joy. It's a different kind of joy.
It's completely different. All power to them.
Yes.
So, okay. So the longer fibers, the longer wools, you said that most of them have more luster to them.
Yes.
And that is, I think, one of the things that I've always loved about BFL.
Yeah.
BFL, and one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, this luster, when it's dyed, the way the color hits it, it gives it a deep glow. It's not quite a shine. It's not like what silk does, but it's got I've seen BFLs that almost look velvety. It's got this deepness to it that the color just strikes in a very different way than it does. Merino, you get bright, but there's something sexy about the longer wools and the way the color hits. It's more like a corduroy, it's got a mattness to it. So
it's almost a flatness. Yeah, that bounce, it reflects the light basically
in a different way. Yeah.
Yes. Because those staple lengths are longer and it's going to bounce light. So
that makes total sense, because
finally I say something.
No, it makes total sense, because if you think about facets in a gemstone, if you just have a few large facets, there's going to be reflection.
Yeah.
But if there's a whole bunch of tiny facets, it's going to knock the light in multiple different ways.
That's
so with
true,
the shorter fiber lengths,
oh my God, that does
maybe refracting in a different, it's going to reflect more.
Well, that's a perfect analogy, actually.
We figured it out.
Yes! Perfect, yes.
Okay, yes. You know what? It's trying to make it make sense in my brain.
Well, and everybody's brain. Like, okay, I have right here, right somewhere near here, I have what? Oh, okay.
I'm excited to see what's in your stash.
Yeah, okay. So I love bouncy yarn. I just do. But it doesn't have the same sheen that we've been discussing in a longer yarn. Okay. And please know that BFL still has some crimp, some bounce.
Yes.
Fin, which I could be totally wrong, but I feel that Fin, for example, is somewhere between the shortish to getting into the BFLs, but it doesn't have that crimp. And so it's more of a flatter surface.
Okay.
It's just fat. No, that's not right. It doesn't have that bounce. It's still got a little bit of luster, but since it's different, you would use it differently. People use it in socks. People use it in all kinds of things. It just depends what it is you're looking to spin or knit. Okay, so this is a 2-plied Rambouillet.
Okay. Oh, boingy, boingy.
Right. So I feel like I could use this for all kinds of things, and it would be just delightful. It's soft. It's got, you know, good dense colors.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. This is also a 2-ply.
So excited.
It's got a little bounce, not quite as much.
Okay, so it doesn't have quite. And is this a different fiber?
Yes,
or is it just how you spun it? Okay.
Thank you for reminding me. This is a Polworth silk. So the silk.
Polworth is another one. We just got some Polworth in at the store I work at.
Yeah.
And so is it? Where does it fall on softness?
Fine. It's fine.
Oh, it is soft. Okay.
And yet it's one of those fine-ish. There's a lot of ish.
Yeah, because it struck me as being more woolly than merino.
Woolly, it's puffy.
It has a sheepier feel to it.
It does. It is a delight to spin. It puffs up. Oh, Targhee is another one that puffs up because of that almost sponge-like feel, that almost sponge-like grip within it.
Okay.
On its what do they call these things on hair? Not follicles. These things.
The word is escaping us.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Your hair has all the little, not follicles. People will be yelling it at home.
I'm afraid I'm not quite, but it's just a property of the hair.
Same with the sheep. That's their hair. I mean,
okay. It just
that's
acts
their hair.
different.
So yes, it's built up with these things. Okay, so this should look a little shinier.
Okay.
Then, I mean, again, it depends on how it's spun, but this is a very flat, I hate to even call it that.
In comparison,
this is shinier.
So with the Polworth, the woolliness that you're talking about and its tendency to puff, you said that Rambouillet also does that. That would make them, I would think, particularly good candidates for color work. Because
they fill in the space.
They're going to fill in the space.
Yes.
When you block them, they're going to puff and they're going to go more towards that illusion of a.
They will relax. Yes, that's great. That's great. They will relax into those spots. Yes.
And I would think that as opposed to a yarn that has a crisper stitch definition and you can see the individual stitches, it kind of ruins the illusion that you're trying to create with color work.
Yes,
because
if you were to
put stitches are visible.
Like, let's say you had one of those delightful 50-50 silk merinos, or I think 50-50 silk merino is a pretty common one.
Yeah.
And let's say you're using something like that Brooklyn tweed.
That's one of the few commercial that are almost all woolen spun yarn.
Yes. So let's say you put those together to knit yourself a color work yoke sweater. Could you do it? Probably. But I don't know that it's not ideal. Well, you could find something that worked better.
They're going to bloom differently.
Yes.
They're going to block differently. They're going to stretch differently.
One is going to be very hardy in its own way. Yes, it doesn't stretch as well, right?
So okay. Well, I think we could talk about sheep for the entire video, but I want to move on to yarn structure.
Okay.
And I think we touched on it a bit. So am I right in surmising that if you wanted to make a scale of
string, scales
is the word we were looking for earlier. Yes.
That's what they're called.
Scales. So the way the scales are on the wool itself affects how it puffs up.
Just like in your own, look at your hair versus mine. I want yours, but our scales and our makeup of hair, our hair makeup is different.
For me, it's just, I have a stupid amount of hair. I have so much, my hair is actually very, very fine.
Really?
It's just I have
Oh my God.
3 times as much as any normal human being.
Okay, it's very fine, but look at its curl.
Yeah, it behaves very differently.
We're each different. So you could have merino sheep that aren't quite as fine as the one living next door. They're still in the fine range, very fine range. They should be nice and balanced. They should have lots of crimp. But it all depends.
So again, if we were going to make a scale on, let's say, strength, could we put so if single plies would be on the weaker end, and as you add plies, you're adding strength.
Definitely. That is a for sure fact, actually.
Okay.
One of the few.
So like what you said about socks, you could get away with like 100% wool with no nylon in it if it was multi-ply, lots of like really tight little plies, like a commercially available, the European style of sock yarn, the Wollmeise. It's like, it's so tight, it doesn't even feel like wool. Like when you're knitting with it, it almost feels like you're knitting with cotton because it has very little. So these properties we talked about, the wool can be either enhanced or almost negated by the amount of twist and plies and things you do.
Yes.
So if you could talk about like what you just said. So you said like a 2-ply is probably going to be drapier than more plies, or it depends on how tightly it's
depends on how it depends on how it was, the amount of twist that went into it. It depends on the length of the staples. A very long staple, I don't have one here, but okay, this is probably again, I pulled it out of.
It's so pretty.
Right, but it's one of the long wools.
Is that a lock? Is that what's called a lock?
Yeah, it's 2 little locks put next to each other.
Okay.
And it feels like silk.
And is that really crimpy? Is that what we're seeing?
It's not. You're seeing a crimp pattern, but since it's long, it just lacks that.
Okay, interesting.
It just lacks that.
The boingy.
Yes.
Okay. That's technical term. The boingy.
Technical term, sproing. Yes. It lacks the sproing and has more of a.
It's more of a boop.
My hair. It has more like my hair versus your hair.
Okay.
There's a little bit of memory in those crimp. They're not nearly as tight as what we saw in the Merino CDM. And you can even, this is strong.
You can yank on it.
Yes, and you don't need nearly as much. Okay, if I wanted to spin it, I would open it up personally. Somebody might want to spin it at this diameter that it was, but I probably would want it thinner. And I would open it up so that the different shafts of hair could get past each other while I'm drawing up toward my wheel in the amount I want.
Okay, but it's really long.
It's really long, so it only needs just a bit of twist to hold it together because it's really pretty much held together. And so that is going to be very drapey.
Because you didn't have to put a lot of twist to keep it in. So when we're getting into higher twist, if you take a yarn, like a commercial yarn, and it's really super like boingy, then it's probably not going to have as good of a drape. Maybe. Would
I knit a lace shawl with it? I might.
Yeah, I'm not saying you can't. It's just trying to give people a general.
Just like the 2 shawls you showed on your yarn structure video.
Yes.
Exactly that. You had a silk and wool, or was it all silk?
Yeah, yes. The one was 100% silk, and it was very loosely plied 2-ply.
Yes, it would stretch out differently. It would knit differently, and your one, the other one with the singles, which was probably a merino or something soft.
It was a merino alpaca blend.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And alpaca will add a little drape, but if you have 10% alpaca, you're not changing a whole heck of a lot, but
Okay.
you're changing its properties somewhat. So one is going to be wider, bigger, all of that than the other, and it takes up the stitch space differently.
Okay.
Was that what you're asking me?
Yes. No. Well, I mean,
Okay.
yes.
You bring me back to the point.
No, it's just trying to understand, and really what I want my viewers to understand is, especially if they're looking at substituting
Yes.
yarn, that they need to look at the structure of the yarn that the pattern calls for.
Yes.
And
I did not know this.
understand that if this pattern calls for a Wollmeise, a yarn that's got a lot of twist and a lot of plies, and you substitute a single, you're going to get a drastically different effect.
I would think it would be like stretchy. There we go. We were talking about memory and stretch. It's finally hit me what it was I was not telling you. The memory brings it back.
Okay.
Sorry. The sproing, the technical term sproing.
Yeah.
All of that crimp, it is memory, not for holding out this way, for sucking back together.
Okay.
The fabric goes boing back together. That's the memory we're talking about. That's the difference.
Okay.
It's not, you can bounce it out, like think garter stitch. You can spread it out and
but it comes back.
Yeah, it's going to come back in.
It's always going to fight you.
Yeah.
And that is so, like, if you took something that was designed for, just say, a run-of-the-mill, using the like real definition of run-of-the-mill,
right?
We're talking about something like
run-of-the-mill, yes,
2 or 3 ply worsted weight yarn, and worsted weight worsted spun yarn, and you substitute a woolen spun single ply. You're gonna, I mean,
if it's worsted weight, can you do it? Yes,
you can, but it's gonna be, I mean,
it's gonna pill.
It's gonna pill in the strength of it. I mean, especially if it's like a heavy sweater, it's gonna pull it down. It's gonna cause problems, right? You're not gonna.
It will not last long.
Yeah.
In the way you'd want it to after all that work.
Yes. Okay. So, so that's really what I wanted to get into. So it's understanding better that what the plies. So how can you tell if a single has a little bit of twist versus a lot of twist? Like, looking at it.
It generally doesn't have a lot of twist, but that's where sheep breeds are really important. When I was a baby knitter, this is the color affection. I really wanted to knit it. I still love it. I still love how it feels.
It's gorgeous.
Thank you. Yes, I put it together solely based on color. I wasn't even spinning at the time. So yesterday, this was honestly just yesterday, I was looking at it and thinking it's wearing nicely. And oh, I love these orange singles. And then I thought, wait a minute, I didn't know anything back then. Let me check the other two. They're plied. So there's sock yarn, which is going to be applied, several plies. And
then the orange is a single.
And the orange is a single. It did not, I think because it's been added, judiciously and equally striped with the other two. I feel like anything that might have gone wrong with it got absorbed by the other two yarns. And no, you can't tell, and they're wearing similarly. But that's not something I would do today, probably. I would not think to do it. Or if I went to pick yarn for something, then I wouldn't do it. If I was in my stash, I might.
So the fact that it was in garter and that it's an element and there's 2 other plied yarns, it was okay. But if that were, say, lace, they would have blocked different. I mean, do you think it would have been more noticeable that you used different fiber?
I think it could have been more noticeable. definitely. I think it could, yeah,
So yeah,
I got lucky.
So what we're saying, and that's one of the things I try to talk about on my channel. Am I saying you can't do it? You
Right.
can try it. It might work awesome. I mean, you can come up, there's some really cool things being done right now with people mixing like standard fingering weight yarns then with panels of mohair.
Yes.
Of the very fine weight. You can mix things and you can
Sure.
get interesting effects. But what I'm more concerned about is if the pattern was designed with one thing in mind, when you bring in more variables, you're introducing more opportunities for chaos.
Definitely.
Right?
Yes. And see, something I learned from you is that mosaic knitting, you're going to need yarns with the same structures. It's not about the color. I mean, color is nice.
Yes.
But
well, I think it comes
yeah.
I think it comes back to, it also was what we were talking about. I think in color work in general depends so much on, we're trying to create an illusion.
Yeah.
And if there are things distracting from that illusion, I mean, if the things are blocking differently, if the stitches are visually different, you're adding in another layer of complexity that will catch your eye. And it will detract from, I mean, all these beautiful color work, the color work yoke sweaters that everybody is doing now. I've seen them where they use a plied yarn for the body and then a single in the color work. And it can work beautifully, but I don't know, it's interesting. I just want people to be aware, you know?
I'm with you.
That the choices they're making,
yeah,
they
I
need
had
to take
no
this
idea.
into consideration.
I thought you go to the yarn store and I thought I can remember making those very 80s like shawls when I first learned to re-knit, but unfortunately it was like the year 2000 when I got back into knitting and I was still making those 80s shawls, you know, with all the fun fur
novelty yarn.
I would go to the store, honest to God, I would be like, okay, it calls for X number of yards, and I would hand my pattern to the owner of the store, and she was not, they were not against my decisions. I just went through, and I mean, it's about sales, right? So yeah. I would just go through and be like, oh, these colors are pretty together. Here's the fun fur that looks best next to them. And I would take them home and I would knit them. I had like a dozen of these shawls.
But did they make you happy?
They made me happy at the time. They worked because, I mean, you know, it's all these giant, like, what are yarn overs, drop the yarn over, do it again. It was just about gartered yarn overs, and there you go, a big triangle. And yes, they made me happy. They worked because there was just so much going on that they worked. And then I learned more, especially when I learned and continue to learn about my spinning.
So yeah. That is really cool. But the thing is I don't think there was anything wrong with the way you were doing it. One of my things is, if you're happy with the results, then it's okay. I mean,
it's okay.
There's nobody, I don't want to tell anybody you're doing it wrong, you know?
No,
if it makes you happy, but if you're looking at a pattern and you're like, I want something that looks like that, I want people to be educated to how to make the correct choices so that their end result is going to look like what they want it to look like.
Certainly. And the same with cost. Like if you're looking at a pattern and you really want to make it and it calls for 1,400 yards of a $300 worth of sweater.
Yeah, no. That's not attainable for everyone.
It's not. And many people need to be able to take that pattern, look at the brand name, and substitute something that at least reacts similarly when knit together.
That has similar properties.
Yeah.
So we need to look at the fiber. And you've given us a lot of ammo about looking at the springiness of it, and how it pulls back, how tightly it's twisted, how many plies it has.
How many plies? That one's hard to find unless I don't see it on most labels.
What I tend to do is I take a little piece out and I twist them in the opposite direction.
Yes.
to see if I can see them kind of fan out.
Okay, that's
to try
smart.
to get an idea of how many plies are in there.
That's smart. Is there anything mixed into it, you know? A tencel or a silk?
I do like sparkles.
I love a sparkle.
Sparkle's awesome.
Sparkle. But you can,
Okay.
you know, you can't afford silk, then go with nylon.
So, okay. So I'm looking at my notes. So we talked about how plies affect strength.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of, do plies really have a lot of effect on drape? All things being equal, like looking at, this is 100% merino. Something that is tightly plied versus something that is loosely plied, all things being equal,
Mm-hmm.
how does that affect drape?
The tightly plied is more of a worsted surface, that denser surface.
Okay.
Did you say it was 2 or 3 plies?
Whatever you want to say.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
Just
Especially with a 3 ply. Well, once you're over 2 plies, the way that they ply together when you add that opposite twist is different than the way 2
Okay.
plies come together. 2 plies kind of hang on to each other
Okay.
and twist together. They twist into each other.
Okay.
3 plies or more is much more of a almost hollow. They don't so much grab together, they make a together surface.
Okay. And so what does that change about their characteristics? Because this is one of those questions I didn't even know to ask. So
it will be drapier. It'll be drapier. It'll wear well. It'll have more light reflecting off of it because of
the 3 ply.
Yes, depending on, of course, what's in it. I think you said merino, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're just kind of, if we're comparing, you know.
It could have more light bouncing off of it, depending.
Interesting. Okay.
Its surface is safer to rub up against.
Okay.
It'll have better stitch definition, most likely.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that 2 ply, while stronger and less likely to pill than a 1 ply.
Yes.
It's only it's a little bit better. It's once you get into 3 plies and higher that you're starting to get more strength, less pilling, and things like that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, that's what you're hearing. Thank you for translating.
Okay, so 2 plies are a little bit better, but you're essentially just knitting with 2. It's more of you're knitting with 2 single plies than a ply.
That was a good way of saying it. Yes.
Interesting.
I think a 2 ply is ideal for any kind of shawl, cowl, hat even. And I have made sweaters with 2 plies, though from here on out. The last one I don't even have. Yes, I do. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry for those of you wearing earbuds. I was very concerned about the way
Look how fine that is. Oh my gosh.
So I was concerned about the colors because it was hand painted top. And so obviously a 3 ply would wear better. So, but I thought to myself, no, this had a lot of silk in it. I thought to myself, I am going to just make a balanced yarn. Okay, it's balanced, it's not skewed or going in any different direction, but that I made a very tight single and then I plied it as tightly. Well, those balanced each other out. You have a wonderful yarn, and I swatched it, and then I tried all of this number, and nothing happened to it. It didn't pill. I would really put it through the ringer, and my hope is that for the way I wanted the surface to look once knit, my hope is with the color runs. I feel like this is a great experiment in how it will last.
Okay, so 2 plies, if they're very tightly plied, are going to wear better than 2 loose plies.
That's yes.
Okay. See, I think we're getting there. I think I'm learning.
Get out of me.
So looser No, it's just making it. No, you're doing great. It's just me trying to understand how to translate it into
You're
my
doing great.
designer brain.
No, you're doing great.
What I could do. So, okay, so the looser, but I really like what you're saying that a looser 2-ply is going to look really good in a shawl
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to drape really
Mm-hmm.
nice. Because when you're really tightly plying that, you're going to cut down a little bit on your drape. Just a little bit.
It depends on what it's made from.
See, and it all goes back. Well, it all depends.
It always goes back.
It all depends.
It always goes back to other factors. There's no one answer other than there are properties to consider.
Excellent.
A Gotland, okay, it is a long wool.
So that's a kind of sheep.
Yep, a Gotland sheep. It's a long wool. It's very rustic. I did it 2-ply because this kind of long wool 2-plied without too much twist, you could knit a beautiful lace shawl. It'll have a little halo if that's what you like.
Oh, nice.
If you can wear it around your neck, not everybody can.
So it's going to be a little scratchy.
Yeah, it's definitely your rustic variety. But I really love it as a 2-ply. And for any intents, because it's so long, I could weave with it. It's got a ton of strength just because we've got a long wool and a drapey structure.
That is gorgeous. And I can just imagine how beautiful that would be in a shawl.
Thank you. Or even a yoke.
Actually, I was thinking more along the those, like a hap shawl, the ones that are that Shetlandy, the beautiful lacy where it's knitted lace, it's lace on both sides, and it's just, and I've seen them in the grays before, and they're just absolutely stunning. What weight would you say that is?
I would call this now this is a tricky one. I did bring it over.
Do you have your WPI tool?
Here's my fancy wraps per inch tool.
Oh.
It's a knitting needle. There you go.
With the marks on it.
I got my inch
Fabulous.
on it. I learned this from Kate Larson, that a round surface is your best surface for determining wraps per inch.
That's cool.
Because you just kind of roll your yarn over it instead of like trying to wrap it. Why is that happening? Sorry. Instead of trying to just wrap it around and make it work, you can gently roll it and get a more accurate wraps per inch. So I would think this is about 14 wraps per inch. It's probably about a fingering, but where I was going with that is usually or often a spinner can look at it, or probably a knitting designer, and say, or anybody who's familiar with yarn, I think that's about a fingering. But when it's all loose like this, or I got a halo, it can be harder to determine just by eye. So that's for sure when I would use my thing. I think I said 14, right? 1, 2, 3.
I think that wraps per inch is something that more knitters, even if they're using commercial yarn, should get a better understanding of. I think it's very common in spinning communities, but not as known in just among general knitters.
This would answer a knitter's that eternal question. Can I use these two yarns together? You know, are they the same weight? Well, I was completely wrong. This was 18 wraps per inch.
I thought it looked like a lace weight. It looked really fine.
You're right. It's just about a lace weight. I think I would call this a light fingering, but you know, there's no need to get too technical because my wraps per inch versus your wraps per inch, they're going to be different. They're variables in how we wrap, how we spin, whatever.
So could you we've been saying wraps per inch and wraps per inch. There's probably somebody listening who doesn't even know what a wraps per inch, what you're measuring. So could you explain what you just did with your little stick with the marks on it?
Okay. Stick with the marks. It's wherever it went. It's an inch. So wraps per inch. Here's my actual inch. And I wrap, you gently wrap, not squish, don't squish them together, but you just kind of roll them, play each little bit next to each other until you've got like a little spiral. and taking up my whole inch space. And I count them, and that Grey Gotland, it was 18. So there are accepted, you could go to Yarn Council, for example, there are accepted numbers.
Ranges, I would
yes,
think.
ranges. So like a 14 wraps per inch, or 12 to 14 is often considered a fingering weight.
Okay.
And so you find a chart and you just go by that. And 20 wraps per inch is the lace.
So that gets you in the general vicinity.
Yes. And
so
you can look at two yarns and say, oh, they are the same gauge.
So if you could, I know that I've sent people to yarnsub.com before. I don't know. Have you seen that website?
Oh, I've heard of it.
It's a great website. I think they might even mention wraps per inch.
Okay.
So if you're looking at substituting yarn and you know the wraps per inch of the yarn that the pattern calls for, you can then try to figure that out based on like the yarn that you're considering for it, and that will help you compare. And yeah, it's just one of the many moving parts that you're trying to to nail
I love how
down.
you said that. You're considering, so there's a great starting point. Well, these two could potentially work together gauge wise
because they have similar wraps.
Let me look at how they're spun. You'll learn to recognize a woolen spun. It is puffy, soft and puffy. And a worsted spun is compressed, and it's compressed.
It's smoother.
Visually. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Is it smoother?
Exactly. Yes.
I've always found that any yarn that I look at, and I'm like, that's a woolly yarn, that it just screams woolly to me, that it usually ends up being a woolen spun yarn.
Or some part of the woolen spun process, because it's a whole range, and that goes the same for your yarns. It's the same for your yarns. So then you're going to want to look at what's in them. I just went through a whole thing trying to match some hand spun. I mean, it took me 2 days of going through my stash and their sheepy ingredients. I had to go back and look at each one because it was such a crazy mix of, it was a carded fiber. So there was a lot of stuff put in it. And that yarn is special in terms of how it will react. So I figured I can't just knit this with any old yarn. I need to find similar ingredients and a similar preparation for this to work as a striped. I wanted it to be a striped shrug.
Ooh, that sounds awesome. Shrugs. It seems like shrugs were all the rage for a little while, and they've just completely disappeared. I feel like we need to bring the shrug back.
This one is beautiful.
I love shrugs.
It's a Kate Davies design.
Love her stuff.
St. Catherine's. Yes.
I think that we could probably continue talking for an extended period of time, but I'm sure you have other things to do. And I don't know if I'd love to hear in the comments below if any of y'all out there have any additional questions for Debbie. If we can come up with some fun questions for her, we might be able to entice her to come back and play with us, because I know I'd love to talk about the next step in the process of spinning, of how to look at patterns and matching patterns and finding patterns that will work well with hand spun yarns.
That'd be fun.
For that, maybe I could get some spinners watching my YouTube channel.
That would be fun. Hand spun, once you work with hand spun, whoa, it's magic. Yeah.
It's one of those, like they say, once you start wearing hand knit socks, you can't go back to the ones that come in the bag.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. So, Debbie, thank you so very much for giving me all this time. And I feel like my brain has so much more new information in it, and gonna be critically looking at some yarns. And I'm excited about the Polworth. That sounds like a lot of fun. And I know I have a skein of Cormo stashed away.
Oh, nice.
Someplace. And it's very, very boingy, boingy, boingy. So
nice. Well, I have about everything under God's sun here. If you ever need something special, I'll be sure to spin it for you. So just let me know.
That would be so exciting. That would be collaboration.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for putting up with me. Thank you for translating for me.
Could you mention some of the ways if people want to read more that you've written? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, she's an amazing writer. Where they can find you and find more information? Instagram, YouTube.
I'm on Instagram. I'm afraid to change my handle. It's Doodler01, and it's worked for me for so many years. So I'm Doodler01 on Ravelry and Instagram. I'm on Facebook as me. I'm Debbie Held. I have a website, Debbie Held, and that links pretty well to much of what I'm doing. I'm going to be putting my classes up. I'm doing several virtual classes before the end of 2020.
Oh, very cool.
Many. I'm teaching at Rhinebeck on the online, of course, and another Sweet Georgia. I am one of the instructors at the Sweet Georgia platform, a School of Sweet Georgia.
What classes do you have with them?
I teach supported spindle spinning, powerful e-spinner, being the boss of your e-spinner.
Oh, how cool.
And there's one coming out on blending boards that we're going to start shooting, I think, at the beginning of 2021. I'm not sure about that one.
Very cool.
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me in any of those places, and yeah, please do.
Yeah, and I'll get the links from you, and we'll put them in the description notes below the video. I'm telling the people out there that if you want to find any of these links to Debbie's resources online, it will be in the description notes below. So
thank you.
And
thank you.
Introduce your fuzzy friend that has been accompanying us.
This is Stanley. Everybody.
He's very floofy.
This is Stanley.
Oh, so floofy. Hi, Stanley.
Oh, he's pretty cute, isn't he?
That is a great face. That might have to be the thumbnail for the video. He's a cutie.
He loves to take a photo, and he takes a nice one. Thank you. He was very well behaved.
Oh, he is very well behaved.
He's a sweet boy. He's a sweet boy. He was given to me by a spinner I've never met in real life, but is one of my closest friends, and she had him delivered to me after losing my Iggy many months later. And that is something special.
That is amazingly special. And you know what? Reinforces something.
I'm going to cry, yeah.
Oh.
I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky.
It reinforces something. It's one of the reasons I love doing these YouTube videos so much. You don't have to have met someone for them to be an important part of your life.
Like one of my best friends, yeah.
It is just amazing how this crazy, I call it the weird wide web.
I love that.
It's so crazy how I just started calling it that because I did a typo and I was trying to type World Wide Web and it autocorrected to Weird Wide Web. And I'm like, that is exactly what this is.
Yeah,
that
they're not wrong. Exactly.
This allowed us to connect with people.
Oh, so true, especially now. That's how many of us are hanging in.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
And Barbara and I have used to know each other. So it's been incredible reconnecting. We still know each other.
It's been years since we've seen each other, but it doesn't really, we're connected through the fiber world and now through fiber optics. See what I did there? Okay. So
clever. She's a clever one.
We're going to say goodbye. Wave to everybody. I usually say, if you like this video, give it the thumbs up. And if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, you can subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Bye. Bye.